start with what didn't happen. Using payroll records covering millions of American workers through June of 2026, researchers at Stanford's Digital Economy Lab found no evidence of widespread economy-wide job displacement from artificial intelligence. No collapse, no mass replacement. Then they cut the same data by career stage. Among workers aged 22 to 25 in the most AI-exposed occupations, employment now stands 19% below where it would be had it kept pace with their less exposed peers. Experienced workers in those same occupations show no comparable gap. The top of the ladder barely moved. The first rung did. The authors are careful about what that means. They call these early descriptive indicators, canaries in the coal mine, not causal estimates. So this episode is not going to tell you whether artificial intelligence is taking jobs. It asks something narrower and harder. What happens to a company when the first rungs of the career ladder are also the easiest to automate? Because those rungs do more than produce output. They may also be where something else gets built. Experience. Professions don't become automated all at once. Work gets automated, task by task. That idea is older than the current moment, and it comes from a paper most people remember for the wrong reason. In 2013, years before ChatGPT existed, two Oxford researchers, Carl Benedict Frey and Michael Osborne, examined 702 occupations and estimated how exposed each one was to computerization. The headline that traveled was that roughly 47% of United States employment fell into the high-risk category. That number has been argued about ever since. But the number was never the useful part. The useful part was the question underneath it. Not, is this job blue-collar or white-collar? Not, does this job require a degree? The question was whether the work could be specified, described precisely enough, with enough data that a machine could carry it out, and someone could tell whether it had been done correctly. Ask it that way, and the profession stops being the unit that matters. Look at business and financial work. In that 2013 model, tax preparers came in at 99%, bookkeeping and accounting clerks 98%, accountants and auditors 94%, but financial analysts sat at 23%. Management analysts 13%, financial managers 6.9%. Treat those as history, not forecast. The model is more than a decade old, and the technology underneath it has changed completely. What has not changed is the shape. These are not one profession, but they operate across the same broad world of business and financial information. What changes is where their value sits in the workflow. You collect, you reconcile, you calculate, you draft, you interpret, you diagnose, you challenge, you decide, you influence. Every knowledge job sits somewhere on that sequence. Most people occupy several rungs at once. If most of your value sits in collect, reconcile, calculate, and draft, there is another way to describe what you do. You may be the workflow. The question is, what happens when the workflow no longer needs you on every step? That is why automation risk is not really a fact about your title. It is a fact about which rungs you spend your day on. Now go back to the payroll data. Among workers aged 22 to 25 in AI-exposed occupations, employment now stands 19% below where it would be had it kept pace with their less exposed peers. Experienced workers in the same occupations show no comparable gap, and this is not a single bad year. The researchers first documented the divergence in August of 2025. It has widened steadily since. Now the part that changes what you are looking at. The gap appears primarily through reduced hiring, not increased firing. The pattern is fewer people coming in, not more people being pushed out. The door was simply opened less often. That distinction matters more than it sounds. A layoff is a decision someone announces, defends, and takes responsibility for. A hiring slowdown may never be announced at all. It happens one requisition at a time in budget meetings, and every individual choice looks reasonable. Nobody has to decide to shrink the bottom of the ladder. It shrinks because no one decided to keep it. Now the finding that reframes everything before it. The declines are not spread evenly across exposed work. They concentrate in occupations where artificial intelligence primarily substitutes for human tasks. Where the technology primarily complements the worker, employment is flat or rising, especially for experienced workers. Same technology, opposite outcomes. Exposure alone does not determine the outcome. The dividing line in the paper is substitution versus complementarity. The paper measures that difference. The management question comes next. Who decides whether a tool substitutes for a worker or expands what that worker can do? One organization looks at a tool that drafts and reconciles and calculates, and asks how many positions that removes. Another looks at the same tool and asks what its people could now do that they could not do before. Both are rational. Both are defensible in a budget meeting. They can produce different companies. The payroll data does not tell us which company made which choice. It tells us that substitution and complementarity are associated with different employment patterns. Before going further, the honest part. The researchers do not claim they have proven that artificial intelligence caused this. They tested the obvious alternatives. The gap survives when technology firms and computer occupations are excluded. It survives controls for exposure to interest rate increases and for remote work. It holds across different ways of measuring exposure, but it also weakens when they control for education. Some of the divergent trends appear before generative AI existed, and the pattern is more pronounced in this payroll sample than in national survey benchmarks. The authors put all of that in the paper themselves. That is what a canary is, not a diagnosis, a reason to look. So, hold the finding loosely, because the question that follows does not actually depend on the cause. If the bottom of the ladder is getting narrower, for whatever reason, a company still has to answer what replaces it. Here is where the paper stops describing employment and starts describing a mechanism. It draws a line between two kinds of knowledge. Codified knowledge is what can be written down: procedures, frameworks, rules, documented company information. It is the kind of knowledge that can be stored, transmitted, and increasingly absorbed by models. Tacit knowledge is different. It is difficult to fully document. The researchers describe it as the idiosyncratic tips and tricks that accumulate with experience but are never digitized. Young workers supply relatively more codified knowledge. Experienced workers supply relatively more tacit, which leads to the sentence that should stop any executive reading it. Artificial intelligence may be automating the codifiable, checkable tasks that historically justified entry-level headcount, while complementing the judgment, client, and process-intensive work performed by experienced people. Read that twice. The tasks being automated are the ones that used to justify hiring juniors. But those tasks were never only output. They were also the apprenticeship. Nobody arrives at judgment. You collect, reconcile, and draft your way toward it. Badly, for years. So a company can now save the cost of apprenticeship. The saving is real, immediate, and measurable. It shows up in this quarter's payroll. The cost, if there is one, does not. It shows up in some later year, when the organization needs someone who can walk into an ambiguous problem and say what should be done, and finds it stopped producing those people without ever deciding to. That asymmetry is the whole problem. One side of the trade is a number in a budget. The other side is a capability with no line item, no owner, and no due date. And notice what this is not. It is not a story about a villain. Nobody automates an apprenticeship on purpose. Every individual choice, a requisition not opened, a task handed to a tool that does it faster and more consistently, is defensible on its own terms. It is also not certain. The paper measures the erosion of entry-level employment. It does not measure a future shortage of judgment. That part is an inference, and it should be held as one. But it is the kind of inference a leader is paid to make. So what is the counter strategy? It is not refusing to automate. If work can be specified and checked, someone eventually has an incentive to automate it. And refusing only decides who gets there first. And it is not hiring juniors out of sentiment. The decision is narrower than either. Automate the rung or redesign the ladder. Because the tasks can go without the learning going with them. Let the tool produce the first reconciliation and make the junior find what is wrong with it. Let the tool draft the analysis and make the person defend the recommendation to someone who will push back. Let the tool generate the alternatives and make the team choose and own the choice. That can be slower. It requires deliberate investment in learning that a pure cost reduction strategy does not. Someone senior has to review, correct, and explain. And none of that shows up as productivity this quarter, which is precisely why it will not happen by default. Nobody has to decide to stop building experienced people. It stops because no one decided to keep building them. So, go back to the question. What happens to a company when the first rungs of the career ladder are also the easiest to automate? The answer may not show up in this quarter's payroll. It may show up years later. When the company needs judgment, it stopped giving people the chance to build. Technology changed what was possible. It did not decide what the organization becomes next. Every strategy creates a counter strategy. Every business decision has another side.